Good evening and welcome to Miss Jackson's Business Communications class. As we begin class today, we'll be completing an anticipation guide for our chapter. An anticipation guide is a strategy mentioned in Rob's Teaching, Reading, and Social Studies, Science and Math, page 114. We will use this guide to focus our attention on the key concepts of the chapter prior to actually reading it. If you take a look at the guide, you will see that it's for Chapter 9, Interviewing. That's the basic concept of the chapter in our guide. Then you will see that there is a list of statements. On this guide, you will agree or disagree with these statements by a check mark or an X. Your guide explores a limited number of the concepts in the chapter. You will find these and many others that I want you to take note of that will compile into the interviewing. So as for now, you would begin by answering if you agree or disagree with the statements. I will go over the first one for you and then model how I want you to do this. So you go through the before checklist and then 1 and 2. So number 1, it is important to know the exact time and location of your interview. I think that's pretty important, so yes, I would agree with that. Then I would go through the rest of these statements and state whether I agree or disagree. Then I move to number 1. What do you think this chapter is about? Well, obviously it's about interviewing. That's our anticipation and our chapter title. But I want you to delve into a more detailed explanation. Based on these statements, what do you think it's about? I would write in my own words a small little statement about what I think the entire chapter is about. Then I would move to number 2. Pair up in groups of 3 and discuss our answers. Each of you in your group would write down one thing you all agree on and one thing there is a disagreement on. Now, I do not mean by agree on that you all literally have agree for one. That you all wrote agree down for the second one. That's an agreement. That counts because you all have the same answers. But you could all have disagree down for one, and that's still an agreement that you all have the same answers, and that would count too. And a disagreement would be one of you has a different answer. 2 of you may have agree for it, the other one has disagree. That's a disagreement in your group. That's what I mean. That's what count for one of these examples. And then I would put away my anticipation guide and begin reading. When you read, I want you to employ another method discussed in Tavani's I Really Need to Teach Reading, Holding Thinking chapter. As you find the same or new concepts mentioned on your anticipation guide, or new ones that are still within what you thought the chapter was going to be about, I want you to write a note or place a sticky note beside that concept. On that note, I want you to write the correct statement or the correct idea for that concept. Maybe it's the exact same thing that's on the anticipation guide and you agreed with. I still want you to write it down. But if it's different, then you need to have a mental note of that, and I want you to write down that too, the statement that would make it true. For example, if one of the statements on your anticipation guide was frequently and constantly call the job back or the place back to see if you have the job. At first, you agree with that. You say, yeah, you need to call them, you need to do it yourself, maybe they'll forget. But once you read, you realize that's inappropriate. The book says that you should arrange who and when is going to call before you leave the interview. Then that would be what you write down on your sticky note. You would write the correct statement. You need to arrange who and when will call. But if it was correct on the anticipation side and you agreed with that, you would still need to restate the correct version in your textbook. After you've completed your reading, you would go back to your after section on the anticipation guide. This is where the sticky notes or the notes would come in handy. You're going to go back through and say whether you disagree or agree. If your answer has changed, then I want you to write down what the correct statement was and what that change is. You would use the sticky notes to be able to restate your change. For the example I mentioned earlier, you agreed with that you needed to constantly call back, but now you disagree with that statement. The change on your sticky note was that you should arrange who and when is going to call. So the change on your anticipation guide would be to make this statement correct. It would need to say you need to arrange who would win roll call at the interview. And then you have completed your anticipation guide. So please begin the before section of your anticipation guide. Go through number 1 and 2, pair up in your groups, and then break off and begin reading your chapter. Look for these concepts and new concepts. Write down your sticky notes. And then go back to the after section. Again, agree or disagree, and write any changes that you have to it.